I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would end up throwing away an apology letter without reading it twice. But there I was, tearing Sharon's forced words into 4 neat pieces and dropping them into the compost bin like yesterday's coffee grounds. Let me start from the beginning, though it's hard to pinpoint exactly when things started going wrong. Maybe it was when my hip surgery left me temporarily dependent on my daughter's family, or maybe it was years before that, when I first noticed how Sharon's eyes would glaze over whenever I spoke about my late husband Harold or my modest accounting career. The signs were there, I suppose, but when you're 78 and your world has shrunk to the size of a guest bedroom, you learn to overlook a lot of things. I moved in with Sharon and her family after my fall last winter. The doctor said I needed help during recovery, and Sharon insisted it made the most sense. Her husband Tom seemed agreeable enough, always nodding and smiling in that way that never quite reached his eyes. Their son Kevin was 21, fresh out of college with a business degree he wore like a crown and an attitude that suggested the world owed him everything he wanted. At first, I was grateful. Sharon had converted their home office into a bedroom for me, complete with a hospital bed and a small television. She drove me to physical therapy appointments and made sure I took my medications on time. I felt like I was finally seeing the caring daughter I'd always hoped she could be. The first crack in this illusion appeared about 3 weeks into my stay. Kevin approached me with a loan application for a sports car, some red convertible that cost more than I'd made in 2 years as a bookkeeper. He spread the papers across my bedside table with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. When I put on my reading glasses and actually looked at the terms, my old accounting instincts kicked in. The interest rate was astronomical, and there were penalty clauses that would trap him in debt for years. I tried to explain this to him gently, the way I used to walk young clients through their first tax returns. Kevin's face darkened like a storm cloud. That's when Sharon appeared in the doorway, as if she'd been listening the whole time. Her voice was sharp when she spoke, cutting through the air like a blade. She yanked the papers from my hands and told me I was living in her house, eating her food, and that while she wasn't charging me rent, she expected me to have some responsibility to the family. Then she said something that hit me like a physical blow about not forgetting my place. Kevin stormed out, deliberately bumping into my wheelchair hard enough to send pain shooting through my healing hip. Under his breath, I heard him mutter something about useless old people. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it had been a misunderstanding, that the stress of having an elderly parent in the house was just getting to everyone. I'd raised Sharon to be better than this, hadn't I? The next few weeks proved that it hadn't been stress talking. Sharon began what I can only describe as a campaign of psychological warfare, though I'm sure she would have called it practical family management. She started having loud conversations with Tom about the cost of elderly care, making sure I could overhear every word about how expensive nursing homes were and how some seniors might be more comfortable in specialized facilities. Meanwhile, Kevin developed a talent for small cruelties. When the electrical outlet in my room stopped working, he promised to call an electrician but never did. I later realized he'd simply flipped the circuit breaker for my room, leaving me without heat on cold nights. When I asked about fixing the Wi-Fi so I could video call my old friends, Sharon claimed it was broken, though I could see all their devices working perfectly. Meal times became exercises in invisibility. Sharon and Kevin would discuss their days, their plans, their opinions, while I sat at the same table feeling like a ghost. Tom would occasionally glance in my direction with what might have been sympathy, but he never spoke up. His silence felt almost worse than their active cruelty. The breaking point came during what Sharon called a small family celebration. I never did figure out what we were celebrating, but there was a cake and some wine, and for a brief moment, I felt included in something. That feeling shattered when Kevin knocked over the framed photograph of Harold that I kept on the side table. The glass cracked right across Harold's face, and the silver frame that had sat on our mantelpiece for 15 years was dented beyond repair. Kevin looked at the damage and shrugged. Actually shrugged, before saying it was just an old picture frame. When I started to cry, not just from the broken frame but from everything that had been building up inside me, Sharon actually defended him. She said it was an accident, asked why I was getting so worked up over a piece of metal and glass. That's when something inside me snapped. Not dramatically, but like an old rubber band that had been stretched too far for too long. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised with love and sacrifice, and I finally saw her clearly. She didn't see me as her mother anymore. I was just an inconvenience, a burden to be managed until I could be disposed of properly. That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. I was going to leave. Not just the house, but this entire dynamic that had been slowly killing my spirit. The next morning, while everyone was out, I took my first independent action in months. I called a taxi and went to the bank where Harold and I had done business for 30 years. I'd been thinking of my savings account. Modest, but adequate for my needs. But the banker reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Harold had set up a small investment fund for me years ago, something he'd called my security blanket. The amount was significantly more than I'd remembered, certainly enough to give me options I hadn't realized I had. From the bank, I went to the public library and used their computer to search for senior housing. I found a secure apartment complex about 20 minutes away, designed specifically for active seniors. The rent was reasonable, the building had security and a community room. And best of all, they had an opening available. Immediately. I filled out the application that day and put down a deposit with money I'd almost forgotten I had. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, capable and decisive. Moving out was surprisingly simple. I packed my essential belongings while the family was out, arranging for a small moving company to collect my things the next day. I left a note, brief and to the point, saying I needed my own space and asking them not to look for me. My new apartment was small but bright, with large windows and a kitchen where I could make my own tea without asking permission. More importantly, it came with neighbors, real neighbors, who introduced themselves and seemed genuinely interested in conversation. Maria lived next door, a retired social worker with kind eyes and a direct way of speaking that reminded me of my old colleagues. When I cautiously told her about my living situation with Sharon, her reaction was immediate and eye-opening. She didn't just sympathize with my story. She put a name to what had happened to me. Elder abuse, she called it. Emotional and financial manipulation that was not only morally wrong, but legally actionable. She gave me the business card of a lawyer she knew, someone who specialized in elder law and had a reputation for taking these cases seriously. Davis and Associates occupied a small office in a building that smelled like lemon polish and old wood. Mr. Davis himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a manner that was both kind and thoroughly professional. He listened to my story without interruption, taking careful notes and asking specific questions about dates and details. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, before explaining that what my family had done wasn't just unkind, it was illegal. Elder abuse laws in our state were quite specific, and I had grounds for both civil action and criminal complaints. More than that, he had a plan. The first step was documentation. He had me write down everything I could remember. Every conversation. Every small cruelty. Every instance of manipulation or financial pressure. It was painful to relive those months, but also strangely liberating to see it all laid out in black and white. Then came what he called the setup. With Mr. Davis listening on another line, I called Sharon. I forced my voice to sound weak and defeated, telling her I'd made a mistake, that I was lonely and scared, that maybe I should reconsider helping Kevin after all. Sharon took the bait immediately. With barely concealed triumph in her voice, she launched into a speech about how she'd known I'd come around, how a little firmness was all I'd needed to understand my place in the family. Kevin got on the line to add his own thoughts about stubborn old people who needed to be managed for their own good. They were so eager to claim victory that they confessed to everything, admitting to their campaign of manipulation and control. Every word was recorded legally, with proper documentation. 7 days later, Sharon received a certified letter from Davis & Associates. I wasn't there to see her face when she read it, but I can imagine her shock as she processed the detailed list of elder abuse charges, complete with recorded evidence and a timeline of events. The letter demanded financial compensation for my emotional distress and the months of unpaid rent I should have been charged as a proper tenant rather than a captive dependent. It required the immediate return of all my personal possessions still in their house. Most importantly, it established a no-contact order, legally barring Sharon and Kevin from attempting to reach me for 1 full year. The consequences for non-compliance were spelled out clearly. A civil lawsuit would be filed, Adult Protective Services would be contacted, and depending on their response, criminal charges might follow. For Sharon, whose job in sales management depended on a clean reputation, and for Kevin, who was just starting his career, the social and professional implications would be devastating. I never had to see their faces when they realized how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. But the results spoke for themselves. Within 5 days, every demand in the letter was met. My belongings were delivered by a professional moving service, including items I'd forgotten I owned. The financial compensation arrived by certified check, along with a stiffly worded letter of apology that fooled no one. Kevin, I learned through Maria's community connections, had been forced to take a job at an auto repair shop to pay off gambling debts that his parents had been quietly covering. Without their financial safety net and with his behavior exposed, he was finally experiencing real consequences for his actions. I could have felt satisfaction at their downfall, but mostly I felt relief. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for months was finally lifting. I was free. Rather than keep the compensation money for myself, I did something that would have surprised the woman I'd been a year earlier. I donated it to establish a small scholarship fund at the community center, named in Harold's memory, to help older women return to school or learn new skills. It felt like the right way to honor both his memory and my own newfound strength. The months that followed were a revelation. I joined the gardening committee for our apartment complex, started taking a watercolor class at the community center, and even learned to use a smartphone well enough to video chat with old friends I'd lost touch with. Maria and I became genuine friends, the kind where we could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours about everything and nothing. I started sleeping through the night again. I stopped jumping at unexpected sounds or worrying about saying the wrong thing. Slowly, carefully, I began to remember who I'd been before fear and dependency had made me small. The legal no-contact order meant I had a full year without any pressure to reconcile or forgive. A year to heal, without interference. Some people in my new community suggested I was being too harsh, that family was family and I should consider giving Sharon another chance. But Maria, with her professional experience, supported my decision completely. She'd seen too many cases where premature reconciliation only led to repeated abuse. As my first spring in the apartment complex bloomed around me, I realized something important had changed inside me, too. The woman who had silently endured months of small cruelties was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than basic human dignity. 6 months after leaving Sharon's house, I received another letter. This one was handwritten, Sharon's familiar script filling 2 pages, with what she probably thought was a heartfelt apology. She claimed to understand now how wrong she'd been, how the stress of life had made her lose sight of what was important. She wanted to start over, to rebuild our relationship on better terms. I read it once, sitting in the sunny kitchen of my apartment with my morning coffee growing cold in my hands. Then I read it again, looking for any sign of genuine understanding or accountability. What I found instead were the same patterns of manipulation wrapped in prettier words. She was sorry I'd been hurt, sorry I'd misunderstood, sorry the situation had gotten out of hand. But nowhere did she take full responsibility for her choices or acknowledge the systematic nature of what she'd done to me. I walked outside to the community garden where Maria was tending her tomato plants. The morning was bright and warm, full of the promise of growth and renewal. I showed her the letter, and she read it silently while I watered the herb bed we'd planted together. When she finished, she handed it back, without comment. She didn't need to say anything. We both knew what kind of apology it was. I tore the letter into 4 careful pieces and dropped them into the compost bin beside the garden shed. The paper would break down and nourish new growth, which seemed somehow appropriate. Looking up at the clear blue sky, I took a deep breath of air that tasted like freedom. The light I'd thought was dying inside me during those dark months with Sharon was burning bright again, brighter than it had in years. I'd found my way back to my real home, the one I'd built inside myself out of self-respect and peace. And this time, no one else held the key.